You grew up in a time when music was transitioning from vinyl tapes to CD, and production values and ethos were moving away from analog slowly towards digital. What kind of music did you gravitate towards at that time, and how much do you think the production and the tone of that music affected your connection to it?
Well, I started, my musical taste was kind of formed by my parents. You hang out with your parents all the time. You're in the car, you're at the house, in the living room, and my father, being an engineer, would always have music on, and his main focus was he loved jazz music. So there would always be like Miles Davis, Cannonball Adderley, Lee Morgan, stuff like that. Classic jazz, Ella Fitzgerald, Duke Ellington, things like that. He recorded a lot of opera, so occasionally we'd have opera on, but it was almost always WBGO on the radio, and the radio was almost always on in the house. So there was a lot of that, and then you go off to junior high and you actually start getting interested in buying, or elementary school, junior high, start buying, in my case, cassettes, because I came up in that kind of middle ground, so to speak, between vinyl and CD. And first cassette I ever bought was The Police, Ghost in the Machine, and I wore that out for 6 months because it was the only cassette I had. And I was a huge Police fan when I was a kid, so that was my main kind of childhood influence. And then just various stages, because I feel like I always rant on the kids today have no attention span, but when I was a kid I would go through kind of phases. I was listening to all this rock and roll, like Men at Work, and MTV came out, and you'd get all Twisted Sister and Poison and all this kind of stuff. So I was listening to all this bad metal for a while, and kind of moved on. I remember in 7th grade when License to Ill came out, Beastie Boys, I was really into that. Run DMC. My father was appalled. My parents were like, "You can't listen to this in our house." So that was interesting. But at the same time, I was still into jazz, and my dad would give me this Stuff record, with all those session cats, Richard T. and Steve Gadd, all just insane New York session guys just put together this instrumental album and live album thereafter, and so I was really into that. Donald Fagen, Night Fly, the Hollies, just such a diverse group of things. And then moved to Pennsylvania, out of the New York suburbs, and you would think that my musical taste would stifle or whatever, but all these kids were totally into classic rock, which I'd never really been exposed to in New York, and like Led Zeppelin, Beatles, Pink Floyd, and I had never really heard that stuff. Growing up in New York, my dad didn't listen to it, my parents were not into that stuff, so that was kind of a musical rebirth. And then I hooked up with all these kids who were like into punk rock, and then I was listening to Dead Kennedys and anything that Jello Biafra put out, and going to see punk rock shows in Philadelphia. So it's kind of diverse. I don't think that I was really aware of production value as such. I remember seeing the video for Spirits of the Material World, Police record, and I saw these pictures of them in the studio, and Stuart Copeland was the baddest motherfucker, like sitting there playing the drums in the dark with sunglasses on. Like I wanted to be Stuart Copeland when I was a kid, so I played drums. He was my idol. And, but sonically, I didn't really notice any of these things, and until actually recently, I broke that album out again and listened to it on headphones. I'm like, wow, there's a lot of stuff going on in there. And I met Hugh Padgham and talked to him about it. But yeah, I didn't really start recording anything until I was 15, 16, something like that, high school. So I didn't really pay much attention to it until, a little bit later in my life.
Okay. That is a pretty wide spectrum of music there. So, not being aware of it at the time, do you think that there is still a particular sound or era or ethos that kind of informs the sound that you reach for today?
Yeah, we're all kind of a product of our musical taste as a child, because you just harken back to that. It makes you feel good. It gives you like it just gives you a feeling of joy to make a record or to make a sound that you've heard before, that you've been influenced by, consciously or not. As a child listening to records, or as a teenager or whatever, that evokes a certain feeling. Like when I hear a Led Zeppelin record, I immediately think of, cruising around in my little car when I was a kid, with my friends with Led Zeppelin blasting, or, on the radio. I wanted to get, a license plate that said Zepphead or something stupid on it. But for me, like, getting certain sounds, again, consciously or not, will bring a certain feeling, a certain recollection, or maybe hearing a sound, like as I'm mixing, hearing a song, will, just hearing a part of a song, forget about the sound, will bring back some kind of reference to a song that I heard when I was a kid, and I'll go kind of in that direction without necessarily thinking about it sometimes. There are times when I set out to make things like, oh, I love that. Remember that kick drum sound on that Police record? This reminds me of that. Maybe I'll try to get that kick drum sound. So, in that regard, it forms a lot of my sound now. Yes.
Okay.
I don't know if that answers the question.
It does. Yeah, absolutely.